I could feel their gazes burn into my back as I slipped through the shadows of the great hall. The autumn equinox celebration raged around me, laughter, loud shouts, glasses clinking, and underneath it all, the unmistakable pulse of power. I didn't have power that made me shrink into the corners hoping to disappear. The scent of roasted meat wine and wood smoke hung thick in the air. But beneath it there was something wilder, the musk of wolves barely contained in their human forms. I wrapped my arms around my middle, my thin dress doing little to protect me from the evening chill that seeped through the ancient stone walls. The pack's ancestral home had stood for centuries, but tonight it felt especially overwhelming, as if the very building knew I didn't belong. "Watch where you're going, Omega," a voice snarled as a shoulder slammed into mine, sending me stumbling into the wall. I steadied myself, keeping my gaze lowered. In our pack, looking a higher-ranked wolf in the eye was a challenge, and challenges were met with teeth and claws. "Sorry," I whispered, though the wolf who'd bumped me had already disappeared into the crowd. My stomach growled painfully, reminding me of the reason I dared to come to this celebration. I hadn't eaten in almost 2 days. As the lowest-ranking wolf in the Northern Territories pack, I was always last to eat if there was anything left. Tonight's feast had drawn wolves from 3 neighboring territories, all allies of our Alpha King, here to discuss the growing threat from the southern packs. With so many powerful wolves gathered, I'd hoped to go unnoticed. I touched the silver pendant hanging at my throat, my mother's final gift before she died. The crescent moon design caught the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. "Strength comes from surviving storms," she'd whispered when she pressed it into my palm. "Remember who you are when the world tries to break you." The pendant was my only inheritance, my talisman, the only thing that made me feel like something more than nothing. At the far end of the hall, tables were still laden with food, though the formal dinner had ended an hour ago. The higher-ranked pack members had moved on to the drinking and politicking, leaving the remains of the feast unattended. My mouth watered at the sight. If I could just get a plate without drawing attention. I slipped along the perimeter of the room, staying in the shadows cast by the towering stone pillars. No one noticed me. I was less interesting than the tapestries hanging on the walls. Years of practice had taught me how to move silently, how to fold my body into small spaces, how to blend in. In a hierarchy built on strength and dominance, being overlooked was often the only safety an Omega could find. I reached the banquet table where platters of half-eaten food remained. Quickly I grabbed a tarnished silver plate one, with a dent that others would avoid, and began gathering scraps, a half-eaten roll, some leftover vegetables, and a few slivers of dried meat. It wasn't much, but to my empty stomach it felt like a feast fit for royalty. I found a secluded alcove behind thick curtains that framed the tall windows and slid to the floor to eat my stolen meal. The alcove was small but deep, hidden from casual glances by the heavy velvet drapes. I discovered it years ago during my first winter solstice celebration, when the overwhelming scents and sounds had driven me to seek solitude. The first bite was heaven. I closed my eyes, savoring the flavors. I ate slowly, savoring each morsel. Who knew when I would eat again? The meat was cold but rich and gamey venison, I thought, from the Alpha's private hunting grounds. I was so focused on my meal that I didn't notice the change in the air until it was too late. A sudden hush fell over the nearby revelry like a wave of silence spreading outward. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and my wolf stirred restlessly beneath my skin. Something had changed. Then I caught it. A scent so powerful it made my hands tremble, pine snow and something earthy like the forest floor after rain. Beneath it ran the raw, untamed power that made my wolf whine in recognition. The Alpha King. I froze the piece of bread halfway to my mouth, my heart hammering in my chest like a trapped bird. He couldn't possibly be looking for me. I was nobody. Nothing. Just a shadow at the edge of pack life. Yet the silence stretched, and with it came the unmistakable sensation of being hunted. The heavy curtain was torn aside, flooding my hiding spot with golden light. I blinked up momentarily, blinded. My plate of scraps suddenly felt like damning evidence. And there he stood, Kyle Draven Alpha King of the Northern Territories, ruler of 5 allied packs, the most feared and respected wolf in 1,000 miles. His broad shoulders blocked the light, casting his face in shadow. But I didn't need to see his expression to feel the wave of dominance rolling off him. It pressed down on me like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. "What do we have here?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. My wolf cowered inside me, belly up in submission before this apex predator. In the 5 years since he'd taken the throne after his father's assassination, I'd only glimpsed the Alpha King from afar. Up close he was terrifying in his beauty, all sharp angles and controlled power, like a blade waiting to strike. His eyes glimmered as he stepped forward, and I saw they were amber cold metallic, like the gaze of a predator hunting in the dark. They fixed on the plate in my hands, then slowly traveled up to my face. "Stand," he commanded, and my body obeyed before my mind could process the word. The plate clattered to the floor. I stood, trembling, head bowed, eyes fixed on the intricate pattern of the carpet beneath my feet. My pale blonde hair slipped forward, creating a veil between us. I was painfully aware of my worn dress, its fabric so threadbare that it felt like a brand marking me for everyone to see. "Look at me," his voice had dropped an octave heavy with alpha command. Fighting every instinct to stay submissive, I slowly raised my eyes to his. The contact was electric, sending a shock through me that made my wolf surge, pressing against my skin like it wanted to get closer to him. I immediately dropped my gaze again, terrified by my own reaction. "What's your name?" he asked, taking another step toward me. The space felt impossibly small now, his presence overwhelming it. "Zaya," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "Zaya Vale." I added my name, sounding foreign, coming from my lips. "Zaya," he repeated, and the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. "Why are you hiding here? Eating scraps like some stray?" His voice was low but sharp, cutting through the air between us. I didn't know how to answer without sounding pathetic or accusing, but the truth was simple. I ate scraps because it was all that was ever left for me. I hid because existing in the open invited abuse from those who relished reminding me of my place. "I was hungry, Your Majesty," I finally said, choosing honesty. I didn't want to disturb anyone. A low sound rumbled from his chest, not quite a growl, but it made me flinch, sure I had somehow offended him. But when I dared another glance, his expression had softened, replaced by something deeper. Curiosity, or anger, he muttered to himself before asking, "How long have you been in my pack?" "Zaya Vale. All my life, Your Majesty, 23 years. I answered, voice steady, despite my racing heart. "And yet, I don't know your face," he said. Not as a question, but an accusation directed at himself, or me, I couldn't tell. Before I could respond, a commotion broke out in the main hall. Voices raised in alarm. The scent of fear sharpened the air, and the Alpha King's posture immediately shifted. "Sire," a voice called urgently. "The Redthorn pack has arrived early. They're at the gates demanding an audience." The southern packs had been enemies for generations, responsible for the death of the previous Alpha King. Their sudden arrival unannounced and during a sacred celebration could only mean trouble. Kale Draven's eyes returned to me, narrowing with cold calculation. For a heartbeat, I thought he might leave me there, return to his duties, and forget our strange encounter. I almost hoped he would. But then his hands shot out, fingers locking around my wrist in a vice grip. "Come," he commanded, pulling me from my hiding place. "But Your Majesty, I shouldn't be seen." I protested weakly, stumbling behind him. "This is pack business." He stopped abruptly, and I nearly collided with his back. When he turned to face me, there was something dangerous in his eyes, something that made my breath hitch. "You are pack," he said, his words clipped and filled with authority. And tonight, Zaya Vale, you are mine. I didn't understand what he meant, but I had no time to question him. He was already pulling me through the crowd which parted for him like water around a stone. Wolves bowed their heads as he passed, then raised curious, sometimes hostile eyes toward me. I felt their judgment, their confusion. What was their Alpha doing with a nobody? Omega. The pendant at my throat felt heavy, my mother's words echoing in my mind. Remember who you are when the world tries to break you. But who was I? Just an Omega, the lowest of the low, being dragged into pack politics that had nothing to do with me. Yet something in Kyle words, in the possessive grip around my wrist, made me wonder if everything was about to change. We reached the massive entry doors. He released my wrist but stepped closer, his mouth near my ear. Stay behind me, he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. Say nothing. Watch everything. The doors swung open, revealing a delegation of wolves I'd never seen before. They stood in aggressive stances, their scent acrid with hostility, tinged with something else, sickness. At their center stood a man, nearly as tall as Kyle, with pale eyes and a cruel mouth. Alpha King Draven. The man said, his voice oozing false deference. How kind of you to welcome us to your celebration. Kyle's posture shifted subtly as he responded coolly. The invitation clearly stated that the Redthorn pack was expected tomorrow. Victor, the man at the center, smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Did it? How careless of us to misread. But since we're here, perhaps we could discuss the matter of the disputed territories, privately. Before Kyle could reply, a commotion erupted outside, shouts and the sound of fighting. One of our guards burst through the doors, blood seeping from a gash across his face. Sire, they brought an army. They've breached the western gate. The trap had been sprung. As chaos erupted around us, I felt Kyle's body tense, ready for battle. But before he lunged, he turned to me, his amber eyes burning with fierce intensity. Run, he ordered. To my quarters, 3rd floor north wing. Lock yourself in. Touch nothing. Then he was gone, shifting mid-stride, his massive wolf form cutting through the crowd toward the threat. I stood frozen, watching as my Alpha Kyle Draven raced toward our danger, leaving me with an order I didn't fully understand. The future ahead suddenly felt as uncertain as the battle beginning to rage around me. I ran through corridors I had only glimpsed before, past startled servants and warriors rushing to join the fray. I fled as commanded, my heart thundering in my chest, fear and confusion, tangling with something else, a strange magnetic pull that seemed to tug me in the direction of Kyle's quarters. Behind me, snarls and howls erupted as wolves shifted, the celebration transforming into a battlefield in mere seconds. The smell of blood grew sharp in the air, and I forced myself not to look back. I had to focus on getting to Kyle's rooms. The worn steps of the servants' passage gave way to smooth marble floors. Tapestries lining the walls told the story of our pack's history. The Great Migration, the first alliances, battles fought and lost across the ages. As I reached the 3rd floor, I emerged into a long corridor, lit by ornate sconces, their golden lights spilling across a midnight blue carpet embroidered with silver moons. The air here was different, cleaner, carrying that same scent I'd noticed earlier. Pine and snow and something raw, something powerful. Kyle's scent marking his territory more strongly than any physical boundary. I approached the massive double doors at the end of the hallway. I knew instinctively they led to his private quarters. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, questioning why I had been sent here, of all places, to this most private sanctuary. The door swung open without a sound, revealing a suite that left me breathless. Vaulted ceilings stretched high above me, and the walls were lined with bookshelves. The furniture was dark wood, upholstered in deep blues and silvers. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, large enough to step into, casting warm light across the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the mountains beyond the packlands, their peaks silver in the moonlight. I stepped inside, closing and locking the door behind me as instructed. This high up in the fortress, with only one entrance, Kael's quarters were as defensible as they were beautiful. My reflection caught my eye in a full-length mirror near the entrance to what I assumed was the bedroom. A frightened girl stared back at me, wide eyes, tangled, pale blonde hair, a simple dress, smudged with dirt from my hiding spot. I looked exactly as I was, an Omega who had stumbled into a world where she didn't belong. But why had Kael sent me here? That question circled my mind as I paced the room, afraid to touch anything, despite being alone. Protection, maybe. Keeping a vulnerable pack member safe during an attack. But there were dozens of Omegas in the pack, many at the celebration. Why me? What had been in his eyes when he'd found me eating scraps in that alcove? A map caught my attention on his desk, spread out and held down with paperweights at each corner. Cautiously, I approached curiosity, overcoming my hesitation. It was a map of our territory, the northern lands, but marked with notations I didn't understand. Some areas circled, some crossed out arrows, pointing to movement patterns, battle plans, or something else. The sounds of the battle below had faded, muffled by the thick stone walls. I moved to the window and pressed my hand against the cool glass, peering down at the courtyard. Shadows shifted in the torchlight. Wolves in battle, some in human form with weapons, others massive beasts with gleaming fangs. I gasped as a pain shot through me, feeling like my ribs were cracking, my lungs struggling for air. My wolf stirred violently inside me, clawing to get out, responding to something I couldn't identify. The pain faded as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping, clutching the windowsill for support. What was happening to me? I turned back to the room, suddenly feeling like an intruder. I shouldn't be here, shouldn't be seeing these private aspects of the Alpha King's life. The desk with its mysterious maps, the bookshelves lined with ancient texts and modern novels, the small personal touches that reminded me Kael was more than just our fearsome ruler. The worn leather armchair pulled close to the fire, a book left open on its arm, a half-empty glass of amber liquid on the side table. I alternated between pacing, watching the battle below, and perching anxiously on the edge of a chair, afraid to make myself too comfortable in this forbidden space. The fighting seemed to be moving away from the main keep toward the eastern forests, a good sign, I hoped. When the door finally opened, I leapt to my feet, my heart in my throat. Kael stood in the doorway, his massive form filling the space. He'd shifted back to human form, but the evidence of battle marked him clearly. A diagonal slash across his chest still seeped blood, though the wound was already closing thanks to his accelerated healing. His black hair was disheveled, his breathing heavy. He had found clothes, black pants, and a partially buttoned shirt, though his feet were bare against the cold stone floor. Our eyes met, and that same electric shock I'd felt in the alcove raced through me. Again stronger this time, my wolf surged in response, making me sway on my feet. "You're here," he said, his voice rough with exertion. He sounded almost surprised, as though he expected me to disobey his command. "You ordered me to come," I replied softly, unsure of what else to say. He closed the door behind him, locking it with a decisive click. I watched as he crossed to a cabinet, poured water from a crystal decanter, and drank deeply. His movements were controlled, but there was an edge to them that I could feel from across the room. The southern delegation, I dared to ask when the silence stretched too long. "Repelled," he said shortly. "For now." It was an assassination attempt, disguised as a diplomatic incident. Had they succeeded, the resulting power vacuum would have thrown the northern packs into chaos, making us easy targets for a full invasion. I nodded, processing the implications. The Southerners had planned to kill him, our alpha, our king. The cold fury that rose in me at the thought surprised me with its intensity. "You're bleeding," I said, nodding toward his chest. His hand rose to the wound, coming away smeared with red. "It's nothing. Already healing." I knew I should avert my eyes from his bare skin, but I couldn't seem to look away. The firelight cast shadows across the defined muscles of his torso, highlighting scars from past battles. He was beautiful in the way predators are beautiful, dangerous, lethal, perfectly designed for power. "Why did you send me here?" I asked finally, voicing the question that had been burning inside me since I arrived. Kyle walked toward me slowly, his amber eyes never leaving mine. I should have backed away, maintained the respectful distance required between an Omega and the Alpha King. But instead, I stood my ground, some instinct I didn't recognize, keeping my feet planted firmly on the carpet. "You don't know what you are, do you?" he asked, his voice low and intense. Confusion furrowed my brow. "I'm an Omega," I said. "The lowest rank. I know my place in the pack." Something flashed in his eyes, anger but not directed at me. "Who told you that?" "Everyone," I replied. "The hierarchy is clear. Alphas at the top, then betas, deltas." I trailed off. "Omegas at the bottom. That's how it's always been. That's how it's been since my father's time." He corrected me, stepping just a foot away. "No, that's how it's been since my father's reign. The hierarchy was established for generations, yes, but it's been corrupted." I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the scent of battle still heavy in the air. "A perversion of the old ways," he said. "I don't understand," I whispered. "No, you wouldn't," he replied. "The knowledge was suppressed. The old books burned. My father made sure of that when he killed the last true Omega and took the throne by force." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. The last, he continued, his gaze intensifying. "Until you." My head spun with implications I couldn't fully grasp. "What does that mean?" Instead of answering directly, he asked, "Did you feel it? During the battle, a pain in your chest like your ribs were breaking?" I gasped, shocked. "How did you know?" "Because I felt it too," he said softly. "The beginning of the bond." He raised his hand, not quite touching me, but hovering close. The worn steps of the servants' passage gave way to smooth, polished marble. Tapestries adorned the walls, each depicting our pack's history. Great migrations, the first alliances, battles won and lost through the centuries. As I reached the third floor, I stepped into a long corridor lit by ornate sconces, their golden light spilling across a midnight blue carpet embroidered with silver moons. The air was different here, cleaner, carrying that same pine and snow scent with a raw undercurrent of power. Kyle's scent marked his territory like an invisible boundary I couldn't cross. I approached the massive double doors at the end of the hall, instinctively knowing they led to his private quarters. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle, uncertain why he had sent me here, to this most private of spaces. The door swung open soundlessly, revealing a suite that took my breath away. Vaulted ceilings soared above and books lined the walls. Dark wood furniture upholstered in deep blues and silvers gave the room a sense of solemn elegance. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the mountains, their peaks glowing silver under the moonlight. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, locking it as instructed. This high in the fortress with only one entrance, Kyle's quarters were as defensible as they were beautiful. I caught my reflection in a full-length mirror near the entrance to what I assumed was the bedroom. A frightened girl stared back, wide eyes, tangled blonde hair, her simple dress smudged with dirt from my hiding place. I looked exactly what I was, an Omega who had stumbled into a place she didn't belong. But why had Kyle sent me here? The question circled my mind as I paced the room, hesitant to touch anything, even though I was alone. Was it protection, keeping a vulnerable pack member safe during an attack? But there were dozens of Omegas, many at the celebration. Why me? What had he seen in my eyes when he found me eating scraps in that alcove? I was pulled from my thoughts when something on his desk caught my attention. A map spread out and held down by paperweights at each corner. I approached cautiously, curiosity overcoming my hesitation. It was a map of our northern territory, but it was covered in markings I didn't understand. Areas circled sections, crossed out arrows, pointing to movement patterns, possibly battle plans. The sounds of battle below had faded, muffled by the thick stone walls. I moved to the window and pressed my hand against the cool glass, peering down at the courtyard. Shadows flickered in the torchlight. Wolves in battle, some in human form, wielding weapons. Others massive beasts, gleaming fangs bared. I gasped suddenly as pain shot through me. My ribs felt like they were cracking and my lungs struggled for air. My wolf stirred beneath my skin, clawing to get out, responding to something I couldn't identify. The pain passed almost as quickly as it had come, leaving me gasping, clutching the windowsill for support. What was happening to me? I turned back to the room, feeling like an intruder now. I shouldn't be here, shouldn't be, seeing the private aspects of the Alpha King's life. The desk with its mysterious maps, the bookshelves filled with ancient texts and modern novels. The personal touches scattered about that reminded me Kyle was more than just a ruler. A worn leather armchair pulled close to the fire, a book abandoned on its arm, a half-empty glass of amber liquid on the side table. I paced again, eyes occasionally, darting to the battle below, then to the chair where I perched anxiously, unwilling to get too comfortable in this forbidden space. The fighting seemed to be moving away from the main keep toward the eastern forests, a promising sign, I hoped. When the door finally opened, I jumped to my feet, my heart in my throat. Kyle stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. He had shifted back to human form, but signs of the battle were clear, an open wound across his chest. Blood still seeping, though it was already closing due to his healing powers. His black hair was disheveled, his breathing heavy. His clothes were disheveled, black pants, a partially buttoned shirt, but his feet were bare against the cold stone floor. Our eyes met, and that same electric shock from earlier raced through me, again stronger this time. My wolf surged in response, nearly making me stumble. "You're here," he said, his voice rough with exertion. He sounded almost surprised, as if he'd expected me to defy him. "You ordered me to come," I said softly, unsure how else to respond. He closed the door behind him with a decisive click and crossed to a cabinet, pouring water from a crystal decanter. He drank deeply, his movements controlled but edged with tension. The red thorn pack. I dared to ask the silence stretching between us. Repelled, he answered shortly, "For now." It was an assassination attempt disguised as a diplomatic incident. If they had succeeded, it would have thrown the northern packs into chaos and made us easy targets for invasion. I nodded, the gravity of his words sinking in. The Southerners had planned to kill him, our Alpha, our king. A cold fury rose in me at the thought, unexpected and intense. "You're bleeding," I pointed out, gesturing to his chest. He glanced at the wound, his hand rising to touch it. "It's nothing, already healing." I knew I should look away, but I couldn't seem to. The firelight cast shadows over his torso, highlighting scars from past battles. He was beautiful, but not in the conventional sense. He was dangerous, lethal, perfectly designed for power. "Why did you send me here?" I finally asked, the question burning in my chest since I arrived. Kyle slowly walked toward me, his amber eyes never leaving mine. I should have backed away, maintained the respectful distance between an Omega and an Alpha King. Instead, I stood my ground, some instinct I couldn't recognize keeping my feet planted firmly on the carpet. "You don't know what you are, do you?" His voice was low, intent. I frowned, confusion flooding my mind. "I'm an Omega," I said. "The lowest rank. I know my place in the pack." Something flashed in his eyes. Anger, but not directed at me. "Who told you that?" "Everyone," I said. "The hierarchy is clear. Alphas at the top, betas. Deltas." I trailed off. "Omegas at the bottom. That's how it's always been." He corrected me, stepping closer. "No, that's how it's been since my father's reign. The hierarchy was corrupted." I could feel the heat radiating from his body. His sense, still raw with battle adrenaline, filled the air. A perversion of the old ways, he said. I don't understand, I whispered. No, you wouldn't, he replied. The knowledge was suppressed. The old books burned. My father made sure of that when he killed the last true Omega and took the throne by force. The revelation hit me like a blow. The last, until you, Kale said, his gaze intensifying. I knew the moment I caught your scent. Subtle hidden under years of being told you were nothing, but unmistakable to one who knows what to look for. You're not just an Omega Zaya Vale. You're a true Omega, the firstborn in 30 years. My head spun with the implications. What does that mean? Instead of answering directly, he asked, Did you feel it? During the battle, a pain in your chest like your ribs were breaking. I gasped, startled. How did you know? Because I felt it too, Kael said softly. The beginning of the bond. He raised his hand, not quite touching me, but hovering near my face. A soft knock came at the door, connecting to the main chamber. Yes, I called, smoothing my rumpled dress as best I could. The door opened to reveal, not Kael, but a young woman carrying a tray of food and a bundle of clothing. Her eyes widened when she saw me, recognition and confusion flashing across her face. Zaya, she gasped. What are you? She stopped herself quickly, regaining her composure and dipping into a small curtsy. The Alpha King asked me to bring you breakfast and fresh clothes, she said. He said you're to join him when you're ready. I recognized her now, Naira Abeda, who worked in the kitchens. We'd exchanged a few words when I snuck in for leftovers. She had always been kind, slipping me extra portions when she could. Thank you, Naira, I said, taking the tray as she laid the bundle of clothing on the bed. She hesitated, her eyes clearly burning with questions she dared not ask. The whole pack is talking about you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. They say the Alpha King claimed you during the battle, that he killed 3 southern wolves who tried to reach you. My cheeks burned. It's not. It's complicated, I stammered, but Naira only nodded, though her expression suggested she believed the rumors. If you need anything. And with that, she was gone, closing the door behind her. I set the tray down, staring at the fresh bread, fruit, smoked meat, and a pot of tea. More food than I'd usually see in days. The clothing was even more surprising, a dress of fine blue wool, simple yet well made, with soft leather boots and undergarments that I'd never worn before. As I ate and dressed, I tried to prepare myself for what lay ahead. The pack was talking. The council wanted answers. The southern wolves would return better prepared next time. And Kael wanted what? A partnership, a political alliance, or something deeper. Something more primal, the bond he had described between a true Alpha and a true Omega. And what did I want? The question echoed in my mind as I fastened my mother's pendant around my neck. Its familiar weight offered small comfort. 24 hours ago, my greatest aspiration had been to find enough food to quiet my hunger. Now I was being offered a place at the center of pack life, a position of influence I'd never dreamed of. When I emerged from the small chamber, Kael was standing at the window, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at his territory. He had changed into formal attire, black pants, a charcoal shirt, and a leather jacket with silver embroidery marking his status. When he turned as I entered, his eyes widened slightly at my transformation. The clothes fit well. He observed his gaze sweeping over me in a way that made my skin warm. I smoothed the blue fabric, feeling self-conscious. Yes, thank you. They're lovely. Blue suits you, he said, then seemed to catch himself, his expression becoming more businesslike. The council is assembled. They're waiting for us. Fear flickered through me. The council. What am I supposed to say to them? Nothing, he replied. For now, let me handle the politics. You're there to observe, to begin understanding the challenges we face. He moved toward me, stopping just close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Are you afraid? I considered lying, but decided honesty was better. Terrified. A small smile touched his lips. Good. Fear keeps us alert, invincible. His expression sobered. But remember this, regardless of what anyone says in that chamber, you belong at my side. By ancient right, and by my choice. Can you hold on to that truth, even when others try to make you doubt? I touched my pendant, drawing strength from its familiar contours. I'll try. That's all I ask. He offered his arm, a formal gesture I'd seen between high-ranking pairs, but never experienced myself. Shall we? Taking his arm felt like crossing a threshold into a new life. His muscles were firm beneath my fingers, his presence solid and reassuring beside me. We left his quarters together, 2 guards falling in step behind us as we navigated the corridors of the ancestral home. Wolves stopped to stare as we passed, their expressions ranging from shock to curiosity to outright hostility. I kept my chin up, though every instinct screamed at me to lower my eyes, to make myself small and unnoticeable like I had all my life. Kael seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps simply used to it, his stride confident and measured. We descended to the 2nd floor where the formal meeting chambers were located. 2 more guards stood outside massive oak doors, carved with the pack's emblem, a wolf howling beneath a crescent moon. They bowed as we approached, swinging the doors, open to reveal the council chamber beyond. 12 wolves sat around a large circular table. Their conversations abruptly stopped as we entered. These were the highest-ranking members of the Northern Territory pack leaders, military commanders, keepers of lore and law. Their combined power filled the room, though none matched Kael's raw dominance. My king, said an older woman, rising from her seat. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe braid. Her sharp eyes studied me as she took in my presence at Kael's side. We've been waiting, she added. Elder Saris Kael acknowledged with a nod. The aftermath of an assassination attempt takes precedence over council formalities. Of course, she conceded, though her gaze remained fixed on me. And this is Zayavel Kael, said his voice adopting a formal tone. Born of the Northern Territory, principal pack daughter of Taya Shadowbrook, deceased. Recognition flickered in Cerise's eyes at my mother's name, though she quickly masked it. And her presence here, she asked. Kael guided me to a seat at his right hand, a position of honor that caused several council members to exchange glances. That is part of what we must discuss today. For the next hour, I listened as they reviewed the previous night's attack casualties, damages, security breaches. The Southern Wolves had come prepared with inside knowledge of our defenses. Someone had betrayed us, though no suspect had been identified. Throughout the discussion, I felt the council members' eyes returning to me, measuring, assessing, wondering. Finally, when the immediate crisis had been addressed, the conversation turned to matters of greater importance. Elder Saris shifted the conversation to what was clearly their primary concern. Sire, she began carefully. There are rumors circulating about your personal interest in this young woman. Given the political tension, the council felt it would be prudent to address these matters directly. Kael leaned back in his chair. His posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. By all means address them, another council member, a battle-scarred man with a gruff voice, spoke up. Bluntly, Sire, taking an omega to your bed during times of war sends a message of weakness to our enemies. If you need companionship, there are dozens of suitable alphas or high-ranking betas who would strengthen alliances and demonstrate proper hierarchy. My cheeks burned with humiliation at being discussed so crudely. Kael's hand tightened on the arm of his chair, the only outward sign of his anger. Is that the council's position? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. That I should select a partner based on political expediency and outdated notions of hierarchy. It is the traditional way, Elder Saris intervened. Her tone placating. My father, Kael's voice cut in sharply. My father was a tyrant who led us to the brink of war through cruelty and short-sightedness. I did not take his crown to follow his path. A tense silence fell over the chamber. I kept my eyes fixed on the polished surface of the table, feeling the weight of their attention bearing down on me. What exactly are your intentions regarding this? Omega asked a younger council member, a woman with calculating eyes. Kale's response was measured, each word deliberate. Zaya Vale is not just any Omega. She is a true Omega, the firstborn to the Northern Pax in 3 decades. Gasps and murmurs erupted around the table. Elder Saris paled visibly. That's impossible. The bloodlines were extinguished. Not quite, Kyle said. Zaya Vale's mother protected her, hiding her true nature, even from the child herself. He rose from his seat, commanding the room's attention. I've spent 5 years researching our history, recovering the knowledge my father tried to destroy. The old ways, the true balance of pack structure with Alpha and Omega as equal counterweights, not top and bottom of a hierarchy. Folklore dismissed the battle-scarred man. Children's tales, reality, Kale countered. A reality your generation helped suppress out of fear or ambition. But the signs are unmistakable to those who know what to look for. The resonance between our wolves. The physical manifestation of the bond beginning during last night's battle. Kyle's words hung in the air. Elder Cerise's sharp intake of breath told me she understood what he was describing. You felt the echo pain, both of you. I nodded hesitantly, surprised when she addressed me directly. It can't be, said another council member. But his denial lacked conviction. Even if such things existed in the ancient days, what proof do we have that she is this true Omega? She's lived among us for years as nothing special. Because she was deliberately kept ignorant of her nature. Kale replied, anger threading his voice, raised to believe she was worthless. Just as you all were conditioned to believe Omegas were the lowest rank instead of the Alpha's necessary balance. The chamber fell silent once again. The council members processed this paradigm shift. I gathered my courage and spoke for the first time. I don't know if what Alpha King Kyle believes about me is true. I said, my voice stronger than I expected. But I do know that our pack, all our packs, are facing extinction if we continue as we have been. The southern wolves grow bolder because they sense our division, our imbalance. I touched my pendant, drawing strength from it. My mother told me before she died that strength comes from surviving storms. Perhaps this storm is our opportunity to find a new kind of strength. Kyle's eyes met mine, approval warming his amber gaze. The council members studied me with new interest, some thoughtful, others still skeptical. If what you say is true, Elder Saris said slowly, addressing Kyle, then the implications extend far beyond a personal connection. The bond between true Alpha and true Omega has been described in the oldest texts as transformative, not just for the pair, but for the entire pack. That's precisely why my father sought to eliminate the true Omegas, Kyle confirmed. A bonded pair creates a pack structure resistant to tyranny, built on balance rather than dominance alone. And the southern packs asked the battle-scarred counselor. They attacked specifically when they saw you with her, Kyle said grimly. They must know something of this ancient lore as well. Victor's father was my father's strongest ally, Kyle continued. They shared the same vision of rule through terror. Victor would suppress the old knowledge just as fiercely. A new respect began to form in the eyes of some council members as they looked at me. They no longer saw just a lowly Omega, but potentially a crucial piece in the struggle for the Northern Pack's survival. Others remained skeptical, entrenched in generations of hierarchy. What would you have us do? Sire Elder Saris asked, pragmatic as ever. Prepare for war while we pursue peace, Kyle replied. Double the border patrols, accelerate training for all able wolves, and send emissaries to the 2 neutral territories with offers of alliance. And her, the battle-scarred councilman nodded toward me. Kyle's hand rested on the back of my chair, not quite touching me, but establishing an undeniable connection. Zaya will remain under my personal protection, while she learns what it means to be a true Omega. The full bond cannot and will not be rushed. It must develop naturally with consent and understanding from both sides. The council meeting continued for another hour, focusing on defensive strategies and diplomatic initiatives. I listened intently, absorbing the complex politics of a world I had always been on the edge of, but never truly part of. Throughout the discussions, Kyle included me with small gestures, explaining references I might not understand, asking for my impressions on matters being discussed. It was clear he was already treating me as a partner, not a possession. When the meeting finally adjourned, most of the council members left with formal nods in my direction, acknowledgement I'd never received before. Elder Saris lingered, approaching us as the chamber emptied. "I knew your mother," she said, her voice softer now than it had been during the meeting. Taya was a strong wolf, fiercely protective. Now I understand what, or rather who she was protecting. Her eyes locked onto mine. "If you are truly what Kyle believes, then you carry a heavy burden, young one. The hopes of the northern packs rest on shoulders that have known nothing but scorn." "I didn't ask for this," I said honestly. "No one worthy of power ever does," she replied with a sad smile. "That's precisely what makes them worthy." With a respectful nod to Kyle, she turned and left, leaving us alone in the council chamber. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of change. I moved from the cramped Omega quarters to a suite next to Kyle's. My few meager possessions seemed insignificant in the luxury surrounding me. Nira became my personal attendant, helping me navigate the bewildering transition from being invisible to becoming infamous. "They're calling you the Ghost Queen," she informed me one morning while helping me dress in one of the many new garments that had appeared in my wardrobe, a silver-gray dress that complemented my pale blonde hair. "Some with respect," she added. "Others," she trailed off diplomatically. "Others with resentment," I finished for her. I know I said it, feeling the weight of their judgment every time I walked through the halls. The pack's reaction to my sudden rise had been mixed. Some, particularly the younger wolves, and those who had felt the sting of rigid hierarchy, embraced the possibility of change. Others, comfortable with their status or ideologically aligned with the old ways, regarded me with suspicion or outright hostility. I had gone from being invisible to being the most scrutinized wolf in the territory overnight. Kyle had begun my education immediately, spending hours in the ancient archives studying texts that describe the true nature of pack dynamics. The more I learned, the more I understood how profoundly my father's reign had twisted our society. True Omegas weren't the bottom of a pyramid, but a counterbalance to alpha power, empathic, intuitive, able to sense emotions and intentions that even the strongest alphas couldn't detect. They could calm aggression with their presence, facilitate healing at an accelerated rate, and forge connections between factions that would otherwise remain divided. "Your mother must have been training you subtly, even as she hid your true nature," Kale observed one day, watching me demonstrate an uncanny ability to sense the emotions of wolves in another room. A skill I had always possessed but had chalked up to hypervigilance, a survival instinct born from years of being unseen. "She always told me to trust my instincts," I said softly, the memory of her quiet guidance taking on new significance. Alongside my studies came physical training. No longer malnourished and exhausted, my body began to regain strength. A true Omega would never possess an Alpha's raw power, but we had our own kind of strength, endurance, agility, and remarkable adaptability. Under Demon's guidance, who had become one of my strongest allies, I learned basic self-defense and how to use my empathic abilities as a tactical advantage. "You can sense intention before action," Demon explained during one of our training sessions in a private room. As my relationship with Kyle deepened, we spent hours together each day, sometimes in formal settings with advisors and military strategists, sometimes alone in his private study discussing history, philosophy, and increasingly our personal pasts. I learned of his childhood under a tyrannical father, how he had been shaped by witnessing cruelty disguised as strength. He learned of my years in the shadows, how I developed keen observation skills and emotional intelligence as survival mechanisms. The echo pain that had first manifested during the battle continued to return periodically, moments when one of us would feel what the other was experiencing, a phantom sensation that signaled the deepening of our connection. Each time it happened, the bond between us grew stronger, our wolves recognizing each other as what began as a political alliance, a theoretical partnership based on ancient lore, gradually transformed into something more personal. I began noticing the subtle shifts in his behavior. When we were alone, the way his voice softened, the way his fingers brushed mine when handing over a book or document, sending electricity through my skin. I caught him watching me when he thought I was engrossed in reading, his amber eyes filled with an emotion that made my heart race. Yet he never pushed, never assumed anything. The full bond, the complete joining of Alpha and Omega that ancient texts spoke of with reverence, remained theoretical, a distant possibility, rather than an immediate expectation. I was grateful for his patience, for giving me space to grow into my new identity without the pressure of his desire. But desire was there, simmering beneath the surface of every interaction. I could feel it in the air between us, saw it in the way his pupils dilated when I entered a room, sensed it in the careful distance he kept, even as our emotional intimacy deepened. My own response mirrored his, a yearning that grew stronger every day, a pull towards something more that my wolf recognized even as my human mind urged patience. 37 days after the southern attack, as autumn deepened toward winter, the fragile peace shattered. I woke before dawn, gasping from a nightmare filled with blood and fire. But it wasn't just a dream, the phantom sensations lingered. I sat up in bed, a burning pain across my ribs that didn't belong to me. Kael. I whispered his name, knowing instantly he was in danger. I threw on clothes and ran from my chamber barefoot and disheveled, following the pull of our partial bond. Guards looked startled as I rushed past them, but no one tried to stop me. They had grown used to my unusual status and my relationship with their king. I found him in the training yard, surrounded by his elite guard. Blood soaked through his shirt, and a messenger knelt before him, his face grim. "What happened?" I demanded, rushing to Kael's side. He turned toward me, surprise momentarily displacing the pain and anger in his eyes. "You felt it," he said, his voice tight. "Of course I did," I replied, my eyes scanning the wound, a gash that was already beginning to heal, but still painful. "Border Patrol ambush," Corin explained, appearing at my side. "Southern assassins crossed the river during the night. The king intercepted them before they reached the fortress. 5 of them," Kael added grimly. "Better trained than the last group. They got closer than they should have." The messenger, a young beta with wide, frightened eyes, spoke up. "Sire, there's more. The Eastern Neutral Territory was attacked last night as well. Their Alpha sends word that they're ready to accept your alliance offer. They believe the Southern Coalition intends to conquer both our territories within the month." This was what we had feared, a coordinated assault on multiple fronts. The Southern Pacts had been gathering allies, building an empire through intimidation and force. If they succeeded in taking the Northern Territories, the balance of power across the continent would shift dramatically. "Call the war," Council Kael ordered, wincing as he straightened. 1 hour. As the messengers and guards dispersed to carry out his orders, I kept my hand on his wound, feeling the tingling warmth spread from my palm. It wasn't true healing, but an acceleration of the natural process, particularly effective with Kael due to our developing bond. "You shouldn't have come running out here," he said softly, though there was no real rebuke in his tone. "It's not safe." "I felt your pain," I replied simply. "I couldn't stay away." His hand covered mine, warm and strong. "The bond is deepening faster than I expected," he said, his voice filled with conflicted emotions. "Is that a problem?" "It's complicated," I replied. "The stronger our connection becomes, the more Thorn will want both of us dead." A partial bond makes us vulnerable in ways a full bond wouldn't. It was a conversation we had been avoiding. The ancient text had been clear. A fully realized bond between a true alpha and a true omega created a synergy that amplified both wolves' abilities. A union greater than the sum of its parts. Such a pair leading a pack would be formidable beyond ordinary measure. But the bonding process itself, the final step, left both parties temporarily vulnerable. Their defenses lowered as their wolves and human sides merged completely. "We should talk about this," I said, "but not here." Kyle nodded, covering his injury with his hand as mine fell away. Later that night, after the War Council convened, the meeting was grim. Reports from scouts confirmed what the messenger had told us. The Southern Coalition was mobilizing on a massive scale. Their army would reach our borders within 2 weeks, possibly sooner, if they maintained their pace. The Eastern Neutral Territories' defection to our side provided some strength, but the Western Neutrals remained uncommitted, wary of picking the losing side. "We're outnumbered, nearly 2-1, Corin reported, pointing to the map spread across the war room table. "Even with the Eastern Wolves, even if every adult in our territory takes up arms." "Numbers aren't everything," Kale countered. "We have the advantage of terrain. We fight on our homeland. We have something they don't expect." Kale's eyes found mine across the table. The council members followed his gaze, understanding dawning on their faces. Over the past few weeks, I had earned, if not their respect, at least their consideration. They had seen how my presence had shifted the pack's morale, how wolves who had been traditionally overlooked now felt valued when I spoke to them. They had seen how my insights into pack dynamics had already resolved several long-standing internal conflicts. The Ghost Queen Elder Saris murmured, using the nickname that had spread like wildfire through the pack. "But a partially bonded pair isn't the same as a completed one. The old texts are clear." On that, Kale said carefully, his eyes never leaving mine. "That's why we must consider accelerating the timeline." "The full bonding ritual was traditionally performed during the winter solstice," he continued. "But given our circumstances, it's too dangerous," objected the battle-scarred councilman. "During the ceremony, both of you would be vulnerable. If the Southern forces timed an attack," another council member countered. "If we wait, we may not survive to see the solstice. The bond could give us the edge we need." I listened to them debate my future, our future, as if it were a military strategy, rather than a life-altering, soul-deep union. My fingers found my mother's pendant, seeking comfort in its familiar weight. "Shouldn't this be our decision?" I asked quietly, my voice low but steady. The room fell silent at my words. Zaya's in mine, Kael's expression softened when he looked at me. "Of course it is. The council advises. But in this, we decide." The meeting continued, now focusing on defensive strategies, evacuation plans for the vulnerable, and securing our supply stockpiles. Throughout it all, I could feel the weight of the decision hanging over us. By the time the meeting adjourned, night had fallen and a heavy snow began to dust the mountains, visible through the war room's windows. Kael and I walked back to his quarters in silence, both lost in thought. The guards took their positions outside his doors, and for the first time since that fateful night, we were truly alone, without advisors, without attendants, without the pressure of immediate crisis. "You're afraid," Kael said as he poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to me. "Aren't you?" I countered, accepting the drink, but not sipping it yet. "Terrified," I admitted softly. He smiled a small, rueful grin, echoing our exchange before the first council meeting. "But not of the bond itself." I moved closer to the fire, seeking its warmth. "What then?" "Of failing you." He stepped closer, his presence a steady heat beside me. "Of asking too much too soon. When I found you that night eating leftovers in that alcove," Kyle continued, his voice quieter, "now I had no right to upend your life, to thrust you into danger, politics, and war." "You didn't upend my life," I said softly. "You gave me one." A real one where I matter. Kale's amber eyes glowing in the firelight searched mine. You've always mattered, Zaya. The tragedy is, he continued, no one, myself included, recognized it until now. I set my untouched wine on the mantel, gathering my courage. Tell me about the bonding. I said, my voice steady despite the gravity of the question, the full version, not what you shared with the council. Kale set his glass beside mine, his expression turning solemn. The text described it as a joining of souls. He said, his voice soft but firm, wolf and human, alpha and omega. It begins with a ritual hunt, followed by an exchange of blood and vows beneath the moon. He paused, his cheekbones flushing faintly as he looked at me. The final step is physical union. It's intimate, sacred. And after we would be truly mated, we'd be able to sense each other's emotions, share strength, even communicate telepathically across distances. He paused again, as if weighing the next words carefully. Our wolves would be permanently aligned. Two halves of a whole. For life, I said, understanding the depth of such a commitment. For life, he confirmed, his gaze unwavering. There's no severing a true bond once formed. I turned away from him, facing the fire as I processed what that meant. And if I say no, I asked quietly, if I'm not ready. Then we continue as we are, Kyle said without hesitation. I told you from the beginning, Zaya, this must be your choice, freely made. I won't use the war, the danger to our people, as leverage to rush you into something so profound. I believed him. In the weeks I'd known him, truly known him, not just as my distant alpha Kyle, had never once used his power to coerce me. He'd never treated me as anything less than his equal. It was that, more than anything, that helped me make my decision. I turned back to face him, reaching for his hand. If we do this, I began, my voice steady, if we complete the bond, it won't just change us. It'll change everything. The pack structure, the hierarchy, centuries of tradition. Some traditions deserve to be broken. Kyle said, his fingers intertwining with mine, especially those built on cruelty and suppression. There will be resistance, he continued, his voice firm. Not everyone will accept a true Omega as your equal. Then they'll learn, or they'll leave. The old ways weren't just folklore, Zaya, he added. They were wiser, more balanced. A pack led by bonded Alpha and Omega pairs thrived in ways we've forgotten. I studied his face, this man who had become so dear to me in such a short time. Behind his strength, I saw vulnerability. The boy who had witnessed his father's atrocities. The young Alpha who had borne the burden of leadership while still grieving. The man who sought to heal what generations had broken. And I knew my decision was already made. Not for the war, I said softly. Not for political advantage or ancient prophecy. I touched his face, my palm against his cheek. For us. Because I choose you as you've chosen me. The heat in his eyes intensified. His hand came up to cover mine. Zaya, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Tonight, I said, surprising myself with my certainty. Under this moon. Not waiting for some perfect moment that might never come. For a moment, Kyle remained still. His eyes searching mine for any trace of doubt. Finding none, he leaned down, his lips brushing against mine in our first kiss. It was soft at first, tentative, a question more than a demand. But as I responded, my arm slipping around his neck, it deepened, becoming something primal, consuming. His arms enveloped me, pulling me against the solid heat of his body. The kiss morphed into an exploration, a silent promise of what was to come. When we finally parted, both of us breathless, his forehead rested against mine. There's a clearing in the forest, Kale murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Sacred ground where the first alpha pairs completed their bond centuries ago. If we leave now, we can be there by midnight. I nodded, too overwhelmed to trust my voice. Reluctantly, we pulled away, each moving with purpose. He arranged for discreet guards to escort us. I to change into something more appropriate for the ritual he had described. Within the hour, We slipped out of the fortress, 4 trusted wolves flanking us as we made our way into the ancient forest that bordered the Packlands. The night was crisp and clear, the sky dotted with stars like diamonds on black velvet. Snow dusted the ground, crunching beneath our boots as we followed a path visible only to wolves' eyes. The forest felt alive, watchful, as if the spirits of those who had walked this path before were accompanying us on our journey. When we reached the clearing, it took my breath away. A perfect circle of ancient pines surrounded a space where the snow seemed to glow from within, reflecting the 3/4 moon hanging high above. At the center stood a stone altar worn by time, but still adorned with the carved symbols of our kind, the wolf, the moon, the eternal cycle. Our escorts remained at the perimeter, their attention outward, guarding against intrusion. Kael led me to the altar. His face solemn but shining with something I had never seen before, a profound recognition, as though his soul had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The ritual has 3 parts, he explained, his voice soft. The hunt, the blood binding, and the mating. Traditionally, we would begin with a chase through the forest, he continued, but given the danger, we've been hunting each other since the moment we met, I said, understanding flowing between us. Circling, watching, learning each other's movements. The hunt is already complete. He smiled, his teeth flashing white in the moonlight. Wise Omega. Then we moved to the blood binding. From his pocket, Kael drew a small ceremonial knife, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. A small cut on each palm, he explained, then we pressed them together, mixing our blood while speaking the vows. I nodded, offering my hand without hesitation. The blade was sharp, the pain minimal as it sliced across my palm, a line of crimson welling up against my pale skin. Kael then cut his own hand deeper than mine, his alpha blood dark in the moonlight. He placed the knife on the altar and took my wounded hand in his. Repeat after me, he said softly, his voice reverent. By blood and bone, by moon and mind, I bind myself to you. By blood and bone, by moon and mind, I bind myself to you. I echoed, feeling the ancient words resonate through me, powerful and primal. 2 wolves, 1 path. 2 souls, 1 journey. Kael continued. 2 wolves, 1 path. 2 souls, 1 journey. I repeated. Where you go, I follow. Where you fall, I stand. What you love, I protect. As it was in the beginning, as it shall be until the end. I repeated the final vow, tears blurring my vision as I felt something shift within me. My wolf stirred, pressing forward, recognizing hers across the thin barrier of skin and blood. Now we seal the bond, Kael whispered, drawing me closer. Are you certain, Zaya? Once done, this cannot be undone. In answer, I reached up with my free hand, pulling his head down to mine. Our lips met once more, and as our blood mingled between our pressed palms, the world around us seemed to fall away. There was only this moment, this man and the ancient magic flowing between us like an electric current. What followed was sacred and private, the culmination of the ritual that had begun with blood and continued with the joining of bodies beneath the watching moon. As we came together on the soft furs that our escorts had discreetly laid beside the altar, I felt the last walls between us crumble. My wolf merged with his, our souls entwining in a dance as old as our kind. Power surged between us, through us, a circuit completed after decades of interruption. In that moment of perfect unity, I understood what the ancient text had tried to describe, the indescribable feeling of becoming both more fully yourself and part of something greater. No longer alone, never alone again. 2 wolves, 1 heart, Alpha and Omega. Not as hierarchy, but as perfect necessary balance. As we lay together afterward, wrapped in furs and each other's warmth, the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky. I could feel Kael not just beside me, but within me. His thoughts brushed against mine, his emotions flowed into my awareness like colors I could suddenly perceive. I love you. I thought, testing this new connection, sending the words directly from my mind to his. His arms tightened around me, his lips pressing against my temple. And I love you, my queen, my heart, my balance. We returned to the fortress as the sun rose, our escorts, forming a protective circle around us. The bond hummed between us, new and strong, transforming us, both in ways I was only beginning to understand. I could sense the life force of the forest as we passed through. It could feel the emotions of our guards without looking at their faces. Kael moved with a new grace, some of the rigid control he'd always maintained, softened by the influx of my empathic nature. We knew without saying it aloud that war still waited on our doorstep. The southern packs wouldn't abandon their plans. Because of our bonding, they might even accelerate them if word got out. But we faced the future differently now, not as alpha and political ally, but as true mates, a bonded pair with strength beyond what either of us could possess alone. As we approached the fortress gates, the guards snapped to attention, their eyes widening as they sensed the change in us. Word would spread quickly. The Alpha King and his Ghost Queen had completed the ancient ritual, had forged the bond that hadn't been seen in 3 generations. Some would rejoice, others would resist. But none could deny the power that now radiated from us like heat from a flame. Ready, Kael asked, pausing before the gates, his hand firm around mine. I touched my mother's pendant with my free hand, thinking of her sacrifice, her protection, and her preparation for this moment she would never see. Ready, I affirmed. Together we stepped forward into a new day, a new era for our packs. The last Omega had found her Alpha, and nothing would ever be the same again.